Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Julie Filiberti, and I'm a current board member of the Friends of Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge. And the Friends are bringing you this presentation tonight. We're happy to have Maeve Kim, who is a frequent visitor to the refuge and a friend of a lot of us. She's kind of put together a presentation to help everybody with their backyard bird viewing. So, um, before we introduce her, I'd just like to let you know that the Friends are sponsoring this tonight, and we welcome your membership. Some of you I know are current members. If you aren't a current member, Rich will put the website in the chat. We would love for you to join us. All of our support goes directly to benefit the Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge up in Swanton, Vermont. Hopefully most of you have been there. If you haven't, we encourage you to go check it out. There's trails, there's rivers to paddle, a lot of beautiful birds up there, as well as a lot of great habitats. So it's a great place to spend a little bit of time if it's something that you haven't discovered yet. And if you have discovered, you can agree with me. So the Friends support the refuge. Everything we do is to support the refuge, and we don't fundraise. We get all of our revenue from memberships and from donations. So we like to be able to bring the public presentations like what we're doing tonight free of charge. And as a thank you, don't be afraid to go ahead and join or give a donation in support of the refuge. It's a win-win situation if you become a member. You join and you get the newsletter, which lets you know of all the presentations that we're doing, as well as all the great things that are going on at the refuge. So we encourage you to be a part of the mission of the National Wildlife Refuge System. Before I turn it over to Mav, I would like to acknowledge the lands and waters of the Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge and read our land acknowledgement. The lands and the waters of the Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge are very special places to those who make it their home. And we, as the current stewards of this area, recognize our responsibilities in caring for these lands and waters. We recognize that these lands and waters are also important to the Abenaki Nation of Missisquoi, the previous caretakers of this land. We are grateful to them and their ancestors for caring for this land and its surrounding waters for thousands of years. We understand the importance of this land in the indigenous heritage of the region and to the Abenaki present and past. We recognize the hardships and suffering these families endured when they were pushed out of their traditional ancestral lands as European colonization took hold. And we acknowledge their agony and despair when their access to the Delta for subsistence was ended by the creation of this wildlife refuge. We invite our visitors to share in honoring this Abenaki home by engaging in mindfulness while enjoying the refuge lands and waters, and by holding the space with care and appreciation. Thank you. All right. I would like to introduce Mav, who is the bird guru, who will be telling you all about attracting and keeping birds in your backyard through feeders, and as well as keeping them safe, which is really important. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Mav. Go ahead.
Thank you, Julie. I agree. Watching birds right in your own yard, right outside your own windows, is one of the most pleasing things that any nature lover can do. Between us, my partner Bernie and I have, I think, 2 or 3 dozen bird feeders. I will stop that funny noise from happening. There we go. And these feeders attract a wide variety of flying beauties. Here are some of the regulars at our winter feeders. These are birds that come every single day and make several trips back and forth between trees and feeders. And it's a good group. The brown creeper we don't see every day. I think he might be out there every day, but we don't see him every day. And here are some sort of delightful additions. Birds that come to our feeders only now and then. We have not seen redpolls this winter yet. Um, but we have seen, and we haven't seen pine grosbeaks, but everything else there. This evening, I will show you various kinds of feeders with pros and cons of each, and various kinds of foods to attract birds. But first, there's one thing we can all do that is way more important and way more effective than bird feeders. And that's to plant shrubs, trees, and perennials that are native to Vermont. Without native plants, you might get birds in your yard, but they won't stick around. Many property owners are attracted to, and gardeners too, to plant varieties sold as pest-free. It just sounds wonderful. You buy something and you get to plant something and it won't get chewed up by insects. Well, that's not the nature of things. That's not what nature is. In any given area, songbirds and insects and plants have evolved together. And as the birds evolved, they learned what trees and flowers and grasses and insects provided the food they needed. And the insects learned what plants provided food for them as adults and as larvae. And then the plants protected themselves from getting chewed by evolving chemicals that taste bad or are toxic. And then the birds and the insects evolved to tolerate those, and on and on and on for millennia. Many birds, why that's doing that. Many birds eat insects all year round. Many more, even birds that we think of as seed eaters, like this little chickadee, forage for insects during breeding season to provide much needed protein for their growing chicks. A pair of chickadees, black-capped chickadees, needs between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars to raise one single nest of chicks and see them fledge. So neighborhoods with non-native plants can have adult birds, and sometimes the birds even nest there, but many of the young don't survive because their parents cannot find enough protein to feed them. And other birds, including most of the brilliant and beautiful orioles and tanagers and warblers like this little common yellowthroat, rely on insects when they're fattening up for migrations to South and Central America. And a small songbird can eat a lot of tiny caterpillars. One Nashville warbler was filmed eating 42 caterpillars in a half an hour. And woodpeckers, from Vermont's smallest, the downy, up to the largest, the pileated or pileated, consume huge amounts of insects, from caterpillars to grubs to carpenter ants and many others. Well, songbird numbers have been declining for decades, with an alarming number of species now in danger of extinction. We can all make our own yards into important parts of this state's habitat, helping to support a healthy, vibrant, diverse ecosystem. We Vermont landowners can help this robin and this bluebird by planting native plants, trees, shrubs, flowers that will attract the insects that the birds need to survive and reproduce. And one more reason to go native, plants that are native to an area are adapted to that area, to that climate and environment. And because of that, they generally need less maintenance and a lot less watering. Adding more native plants doesn't mean we all have to rush out right now and get rid of every imported iris or daffodil or rose or hosta or peony or sedum or daylily, or every imported kind of rose like this. Many of these plants, while not supplying caterpillars for Vermont's birds, are still great for pollinating bees and wasps, flies, and butterflies. At our house, non-native apple trees like the little crab apple we planted on the right there coexist peacefully with the old native plum trees on the left. Both plum and apple trees are covered with minuscule caterpillars every spring, summer, and fall. And the birds, like this Cape May warbler, know about the feast. Apples are wonderful, by the way. Apples are the major, and their whole family, exception to the rule about native versus non-native plants. They most apples here are not native. They're only apples native to North America were three kinds of crab apples. But the ones that have been brought in or the ones that have been developed later have adapted beautifully. And native insects and birds have adapted beautifully to them, like this red-eyed vireo in one of our old apple trees. And while you're thinking about and planning and getting and planting native species, look around at the non-native species in your yard and notice which ones might be becoming invasive. In New England, this is sort of a shocking statistic, fully 1/3 of the plants are non-native. And many of those have become invasive, meaning they spread and take over everything. I think we've all heard about milfoil and water chestnut clogging our lakes, purple loosestrife and phragmites killing off native cattails, Japanese knotweed coming up just about everywhere. Non-native plants don't have to cope with insects eating them. So, of course, they can easily crowd out the natives. And they replace plants that provide important services for wildlife with plants that provide fewer or none of these services. Here's one of the invasives that we've been fighting for years, goutweed. The link on this slide will help you identify invasive plants. And after adding native plants, the second most important thing to make our yards part of the natural landscape and invite birds to our yards is to reduce the size of lawns. Lawns have little value to wildlife or birds or anything. They use up fossil fuels, they use up water. And worse, much worse, many people feel they have to use fertilizers, weed killers, and sometimes even pesticides on their yards and their lawns. According to the National Audubon Society, many suburban lawns all the way across the United States have 10 times more chemicals per acre than farmland. And we're always criticizing farmers for dumping poisons into the atmosphere. These chemicals, well, a lot of chemicals. Americans spend $70 billion a year on lawn chemicals. And these chemicals are implicated in the staggering loss of pollinators worldwide. Bees and butterflies in particular are very susceptible to those chemicals. And we really need those insects. It's estimated that 1 out of every 3 bites of food we eat depend on pollinators. And many of America's pollinators have disappeared already or are disappearing fast. And if the rest go, we will lose as many as 1,200 crops and over 100,000 different plant species. I love this photo, by the way. It's just pretty. All the insect photos in this presentation and many of the bird photos were taken by my partner, Bernie Paquette. And other Vermonters, Julie also provided some pictures, and they are given credit on the slides. There's a national movement called the de-lawning of America. It doesn't mean that everyone should immediately take their lawnmowers to the dump. Many de-lawners begin by leaving unmown islands, separated by mowed paths, either wide like this one or narrow like these. So if you've got areas that you mow and mow and mow, and it's taking up your valuable time when you could be doing something much more fun, and you realize that you and your family aren't even using those mowed areas, then it's time to consider some alternatives. Instead of lawn, plant some perennials or shrubs like the American cranberry on the left. This picture was taken 4 years ago, and that cranberry is now about 15 to 20 feet tall. Or if you've got room, plant a few trees such as native oaks, which are awesome for caterpillars, elms or cherries, all of which great food producers for birds. Or put in a few fast-growing willows. Some species of willows support an astonishing 415 kinds of caterpillars. Or clear a space for native wildflowers. If you do this, though, be patient. We've been impatient often. They take time to get established. As one woman told us, first year sleep, second year creep, third year leap. Well, for some of them, it's actually the fourth and fifth years creeping also, and then leap comes later. um, Waiting through all those creep and sleep years can be quite frustrating. Or you can put in some raised beds and grow some veggies and give yourself some protection against rising food prices. So to sum up so far, you want birds? Then you should do this. Embrace insects, embrace weeds, embrace mess. You might have to explain to your neighbors, though, and signs like this really help. Neighbors sometimes stop to ask about the signs. Well, there are many other things you can do to make your yard bird friendly. Whoops, jumped right past that. Sorry, Toey. One of the most obvious is to avoid all insecticides. Insecticides kill bugs, that's what they're for. And they're also implicated in the increase of various kinds of cancers in humans. We really don't want them in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the grass we walk on, or the food we eat. Another vitally important step is to keep cats indoors. I love cats. I've had over a dozen, but they've all been indoor cats. Domestic and feral cats in the US kill 1 million birds a day, every single day. Cats are the most abundant carnivore in North America, and their numbers are rising. But nearly 1/3 of US bird species are endangered, threatened, or in significant decline. Another great thing to make your yard bird friendly is to create at least one brush pile. A lot of species hunt or roost or nest in brush piles, and others use the piles to hide from predators. They're even more important if you live in a suburban or urban area because the surrounding habitat tends to be more manicured or simplified. Another great thing to do, and this is really easy, is to just don't rake the leaves. Or if you have to rake them under shrubs and trees. You will be making ground feeding birds very happy and insects very happy. Lots of wonderful insects will discover that decaying matter and overwinter in them. And then the birds, like this beautiful eastern towhee or sparrows, will find a delicatessen spread out for them when they come back of little tiny insects. Now to feeding birds, the topic many of you probably came tonight to hear about. But feeders alone don't always attract birds. So many people have been frustrated when they spend a small fortune on bird feeders and bird food, and a few birds drop by, and that's it. Millions of us enjoy feeding birds, and there are hundreds and hundreds of feeders available. And feeders fall into several categories. Let's start with hopper or house feeders, like the one on the right. These feeders hold seed in reservoirs and let it drop into trays as the birds eat. And there's a lot to be said for hopper feeders. As you look at all this, and they're cute, a lot of them, they're attractive, they're sturdy. Although I had bears completely flatten one metal one time, but in general, they're pretty sturdy. Some even have special mechanisms that close the door on the seed if a squirrel or even a really heavy bird lands on the perch. But there are some negatives to hopper feeders. They're, yeah, I guess the most important is they're hard to clean. We have several hopper or house feeders, and we don't put them out as often as some others, partly because of that, and partly because they end up feeding our red and gray squirrels as much or more than they feed the birds. Second common type of feeder, probably the most common, is the tube feeder, like the one this little American tree sparrow is visiting. Tube feeders come in a wide variety of sizes, and some are really huge. They can be made of plastic, metal, even glass. Squirrels can use tube feeders too, and that has resulted in some specialized tube feeders with squirrel excluder devices. They're sold as squirrel proof, but really they should just be called squirrel resistant. Squirrels are remarkably crafty and creative and determined. There are some cons about tube feeders. They can spread disease a little more easily than the hopper feeders, and they can be really hard to clean, um, especially in the area below the perches. You need a really long uh, bottle brush to get in there or soak them for a long time. The feeder on the left here is a brome squirrel buster, a specialized tube feeder. If anything lands on any of those perches, access to the seed is immediately closed off. We have had more than a dozen years of squirrel-free success with a brome squirrel buster. I'm really pleased with it. It's not particularly easy to clean, but the seed is kept dry, so we haven't had any problems with mildew or rot. The other specialized tube feeder on the right is a droll Yankee whipper. Those curved perches result in heavier animals sliding right off. And the same company also makes droll Yankee flippers. I've never seen one at work, but supposedly it throws squirrels right off, throws them quite a distance for the hefty price of, I think they're $160 now. Both of these feeders hold a lot of seed and keep them clean. One more possible negative with tube feeders, all of them, is that birds with big bills can't use them well, like this female northern cardinal or this female evening grosbeak. These birds prefer the third type of feeder, trays or tray feeders. And just about every single species of birds likes tray feeders. Here are evening grosbeak males with a late winter common grackle. I think that was the first one we saw that year, and red-winged blackbird male. And here are two female red-winged blackbirds and a gorgeous male rose-breasted grosbeak enjoying a tray feeder. And this year we were really excited. We had a rare to us, in fact, never before seen in our yard to us, visitor to our tray feeder during December and January, still coming every now and then, a male red-bellied woodpecker. These birds are relatively new to Vermont, and we had never had one here in Jericho Center. We have several tray feeders. We don't have them all out at once. And there are a lot of good things about them. I mean, you can make them yourself. You can hang them or mount them. You can even put them down on the ground. They're very easy to clean. You just scrape off the gunk and then wash them. A large variety of birds really, really like them. The one negative is they are absolutely 100% accessible for squirrels and other animals. We have even had white-tailed deer standing calmly in the snow and munching seed off our tray feeder. Also, the seeds get really wet, and the bird droppings can spread disease. These kind of feeders have to be cleaned often. And there's no protection from flying predators or cats that can leap a large distance. There's a little bit of protection offered by hoppers and tubes. Baffles like these won't deter deer because they're tall enough, but they're excellent ways to keep squirrels and raccoons from climbing up and chowing down. I love that feeder on the left. I don't think they're even made anymore. It was when a store was closing in Essex Junction, and that was in their closeout sale. And we've used it for many, many years. If you want to put the feeders out, just make sure that you put them 15 feet or more from the nearest tree, and then squirrels can't just jump over onto the tray. If they're closer to a tree, those baffles are pretty worthless. And then there are some specialized feeders for specific kinds of food. Suet feeders, which are sometimes called suet cages, are just about the least expensive type of bird feeder around. You can buy suet cakes that fit exactly, some with seeds or fruit or nuts in them. You can make your own suet cakes. There are lots of recipes online. Or you can put chunks of real suet in the cages. There's still some butchers around that will sell people suet, real suet. This wood and glass feeder with metal holes is ideal for mixed seed, although we usually put shelled peanuts in it, unsalted peanuts, of course. We have been astonished at how many varieties of birds love shelled, unsalted peanuts. They're like a little burst of fat and protein. Um, Woodpeckers, chickadees, tufted titmice, nuthatches, even a white-throated sparrow ate some peanuts one time. You can see a downy woodpecker over on the right here enjoying that feeder with peanuts in it. But the chickadee is on another kind of feeder, a mesh feeder. And this one's obviously made to look cute. Mesh feeders are often sold as Niger or thistle seed feeders, or sometimes finch seed feeders. But they can be used for any seed that's small enough to be extracted. We haven't had a whole lot of luck in terms of popularity with the birds with this kind of feeder, but sometimes the finches will pull hulled sunflower through the mesh. And that leads to another kind of next question. What kind of bird food to put out? Since we're looking at a mesh feeder, let's consider thistle seed or Niger seed first. It's sometimes sold mixed in with other very small seeds as finch mix, because goldfinches like this beauty and other and siskins um, like this kind of seed. It requires either mesh bags or feeders with very small ports. We have given up on thistle or Niger seed entirely, and many other people who feed birds have, because there have been so many problems with it. The tiny seeds tend to go bad very quickly, developing mildew and rot in the bag. Also, the seed is heat treated before being sold so that the dropped seed can't germinate and fill people's yards with unwanted thistles. But apparently, it's really tricky to treat the seed just enough and not too much. Thistle seed should look shiny and black, like really good coffee beans. If it appears dull, or if they're brown seeds mixed with the black ones, it's too old or it's been too heated, and the birds won't eat any of it. And you're going to end up putting it in your compost heap, and it's pricey. Sunflower seed, particularly black oil sunflower, is a favorite of many species of birds. We almost always get it hulled, which is sometimes called shelled or chipped. Although in this picture, this little pine siskin is working hard at shelling a black oil sunflower seed that isn't hulled. Hulled or chipped or shelled sunflower seed is more expensive than the kind with hulls, but there's no mess under the feeders and there's no waste. For every 10-pound bag of sunflower seed, hulls account for as much as 3 full pounds. So that's 3 out of every 10 pounds that won't be feeding any birds at all and will just end up on the ground. Safflower seed gained fame a while ago as a food that starlings and squirrels don't like, but cardinals do. Well, that's not entirely true. Certainly, cardinals and mourning doves like it, but squirrels get used to it pretty fast. But still, safflower is a useful addition to any backyard feeding station. I also read that you can deter squirrels by putting cayenne pepper in the food, and I tried that one year, and the squirrels tasted the hot stuff, and they disappeared for a full day or maybe 2 days, and then they returned and ate with gusto. I think they had actually developed a taste for fiery food. If you prefer to buy a seed mix, go for the higher priced ones. Spending more will save you money. Cheap mixes are full of seeds that almost no birds will eat, and your money will get tossed on the ground to rot or germinate or attract rodents or spread disease. If you go for a mix, choose one that's mostly sunflower and white proso millet. Avoid mixes with a lot of corn and avoid mixes with any milo, rapeseed, or other fillers. Those are rarely eaten. And peanut butter's on this list, and peanut butter feeders are wicked easy. Just pick up a stick and spread on the peanut butter, preferably a natural kind. Now, some people offer mealworms. I've had only 2 experiences with mealworms, and both were several years ago. One winter, and some of you may remember this, a varied thrush showed up in a Montpelier backyard. Now, varied thrushes are West Coast birds. This poor lost creature was far, far from where it should have been. The landowner took a few photos and found out what she had and studied up on what the thrushes eat. And then she snipped a lot of raisins in half and softened them in hot water and put them out. And the thrush ate them all. And then the caring woman went to a pet store and bought mealworms. That fortunate bird lived all winter long. He disappeared in late March on mealworms and fruit that was specially prepared just for him. And incidentally, that delighted scores of Vermont birders who traveled to Montpelier for a look at the wanderer. My second mealworm experience was when I was fostering an injured yellow-bellied sapsucker. Sapsuckers are related to woodpeckers, and that whole family is known for being unusually willing to accept human help when they need it or when they're injured. My bird, quote unquote, allowed me to hold it so it could lap sugar water from a saucer, and then accepted mealworms from my hand. We've never tried mealworms at the backyard feeders, and it probably won't because there's so many other options. But we have a friend who has had eastern bluebirds come to a tray feeder in late winter when she put out mealworms. Ornithologists believe that most birds will spend the winter months in areas where they can find enough natural food to keep them alive. In other words, the birds don't usually need the sunflower seed and other treats we put out for them. Feeding birds is mostly for us, the humans, and it's a great way to introduce youngsters to birds. However, backyard feeding stations can really help, can really keep birds alive, actually, through particularly harsh winters or unusually cold springs. Barred owls have a rough time getting food in winters with heavy snow or a thick layer of ice. They often appear at feeders, looking for the small rodents that come out of their tunnels at night to pick up dropped seed. This bird watched our yard for 3 days, and either that owl or a different one caught a rabbit in our driveway. That's a huge take for a bird that usually swallows its prey whole. But this was a desperate bird. Many owls get close to starving to death in winters with heavy snow or ice. And feeding birds can also help when this happens: sudden spring storms. I don't know if you remember the first 2 weeks of May 2020, but they were cold and windy and wet, and there were 2 snowstorms. Flowering plants were late. Insects that normally hatch out in May didn't. Many returning migratory birds found nothing but wasteland. It's estimated that thousands and thousands of tree swallows died, and bird lovers couldn't save them. But we could save the orioles. People who had already taken in their winter feeders rushed to put out sliced oranges and jelly and suet. Excuse me, my voice is going here. The birds were literally starving and willing to overcome their usual wariness and come close to houses. Bernie and I had the delight and the excitement of seeing 5 Baltimore Orioles at one time right outside the kitchen windows in the snow. It's almost a surreal juxtaposition there. Adult males like this one, adult females, and first year males who hadn't quite finished growing into their handsome orange plumage. That circle in the background is specifically for feeding orange halves. And the blue basket was not bought as a feeder. I think I bought it to put onions in or something. But it worked really well for slices of orange, chunks of suet, and a small metal dish with jelly in it. And after that spring, 2020, we've been putting out this basket every May with jelly in it. And the Orioles always come down. They love the jelly. I make and freeze juice from our own elderberries and rose hips, crab apples, currants, and wild grapes. Mix it all together and make it into jelly when it gets boring during the winter. And the Orioles love it. And we get a kick out of seeing them just outside the kitchen windows. If you want to put out jelly for Orioles, it should be homemade, or you can use a product called Birdberry, which is available in some feed stores and online. Almost all regular supermarket jelly has high fructose corn syrup, and some studies suggest that is not healthy for birds, and possibly not for us either. 2 things to remember about feeding wild birds. There is almost always a lag time between putting out feeders, particularly brand new ones, and having the birds actually appear, from a few days till over a week. And feeding the birds might be even more important in urban areas than in the countryside, because so many sources of natural food have disappeared from most cities. And choosing to feed any wild animal comes with responsibilities. Feeding wildlife results in crowding that would not happen naturally. And the crowding has a couple of ramifications. Disease is easier to spread and makes the birds more vulnerable to predators. If we're going to feed small birds, we have to realize that we are also attracting the large birds that eat the smaller ones. Like this absolutely gorgeous sharp-shinned hawk photographed in a Jericho backyard. This is just a portrait of the intense concentration of a raptor that has to find and catch fast-moving flying prey just to make it through the day. Love this picture. Predation from the sky is nature, and we can't really stop it from happening. We can provide some cover for the little birds, though. Brush piles are great, as are nearby conifers. For several years after Christmas, we went on Front Porch Forum and let people know they could drop off their used Christmas trees at our house instead of going all the way to the dump. And then Bernie would tie the trees together near the bird feeders, which provided lots of hiding places for the chickadees and finches and titmice, etc. But if a raptor is hanging around and taking a bird a day or more, you might want to take in the feeders for a few days and the raptor will go elsewhere. And of course, if your yard has even one free-ranging cat, there's no question. Don't put out the feeders at all. In addition to possibly increased predation, it's so much easier for diseases to spread when wildlife is concentrated and in close contact with each other. Cleanliness is super important. And that means the feeders and the ground under the feeders. In general, clean the feeders pretty often. Some people say every 2 weeks, some say once a month. Depends on how gunky they get. For flat feeders, scrape off the gunk and scrub with a really mild bleach and water solution, and then soak tube feeders in the similar solution and let them dry in the sun. And rake up dropped seed often. Remember, you'll have less on the ground if you use hulled sunflower seed. And when you're buying feeders, look for ones that come apart really easily, are easy to clean, and look like they're going to be easy to reassemble. You can't always tell. Almost everybody who has fed birds has ended up with feeders that were almost impossible to clean or impossible to put back together. And then those feeders end up in the dump. There are two diseases that spread at crowded bird feeding stations. Salmonella makes birds lethargic, so you will see them sitting in sheltered areas with their feathers all fluffed up, walking unsteadily, shivering. They can show lack of appetite, actual convulsions, and diarrhea. Infected birds lose weight quickly due to lesions in the crop and intestines, and usually are dead within 1 to 3 days. And we humans can get that salmonella. So if you have birds at your feeder that look sick, use rubber gloves to handle the dropped seed and to clean the feeders. And don't just put the feeders in your dishwashers. The other common disease that can occur around bird feeders is avian conjunctivitis, like this poor little house finch had. This poses no known health threat to humans. It can't become pink eye in humans, but it can be deadly for birds. Infected birds have swollen eyes like this, even though the disease is mostly a respiratory infection. Some infected birds will recover on their own, but others die from starvation, exposure, or predation because they can't see well. If you see even one bird with swollen red eyes at your feeders, you have to take them in for a week and scrub them really well before putting them back out. Along with food, you can also provide water for birds, but of course, the same thing. You got to keep the bird bath clean. A few more ways to keep birds safe. Oops, I went ahead one slide, but anyway, don't put a feeder close to a road where they have to like drift in across the road to get to the feeder. And position feeders so that they're less apt to fly into the outside wall or windows if they're scared away by a raptor. Now, some people ask about two other possible negatives of feeding birds. First, they worry that the birds might become dependent on bird feeders and lose the ability to forage for themselves. The experts at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology say birds search for food in many places. If your feeder goes empty, they will find food elsewhere. Of course, Cornell adds, a sudden disappearance of food might be a hardship during periods of extreme ice or snow or cold. So if local birds have become accustomed to your feeders and you're going to be leaving town during freezing weather, you might want to have somebody else come over and fill your feeders. And the second worry is well-fed birds might just decide not to migrate. Again, from Cornell, a bird's migratory urge is primarily triggered by day length, and even an abundance of food at your feeders will not make a bird resist that urge. And in fact, your feeder might provide a needed energy boost along a bird's migration route. Now, one more special kind of bird feeder, not for winter visitors, but for use in the summer, hummingbird feeders. The ruby-throated hummingbird is the only species of hummingbird that breeds here in the Northeast, and their return every spring is a delight. This is a female, and this is a male with the ruby throat. The first migrants might pass through your yard as early as the third week in April, when there are very few flowers blooming. They sometimes go to the sap wells dug by yellow-bellied sapsuckers and drink that liquid, but they also come readily to nectar feeders. You can catch the attention of hummingbirds by putting a bright red feeder in the middle of your yard in a spot where it will be in sunlight for at least part of a day. And once the migrating birds notice it and are coming regularly, you can move the feeder to a more convenient spot if you want to. To make hummingbird nectar is so easy. Just combine 4 parts water to 1 part white sugar, boil 4 minutes, and let it cool and store in the refrigerator. Don't add food coloring. Don't buy the red nectar sold in some stores. The verdict is still out, but many experts think that that is not good in the long run for birds. And never use honey, which some people think is a good idea because it feels more natural. Honey can actually kill hummingbirds. Once you've attracted hummingbirds, keep them coming by cleaning and refilling the feeders regularly, once a week in cool weather, more frequently if it's hot. You don't have to worry too much about hummingbirds eating rotten food. They come, they check it, and they leave. But if you really want them to keep coming, clean the feeders, and then you'll have the delight of seeing them. Most times, rinsing with hot water at a bottle brush will be sufficient. Don't use dish detergent because it's very hard to get that all out. If there's a lot of dark mold, which sometimes happens, you may have to use a very weak bleach solution. And in this case, rinse very well and let the feeders dry in the sun before refilling them. By the way, bears might enjoy the nectar in hummingbird feeders if they discovered it, but there's no smell to attract them. Many people can safely put out nectar feeders even in areas where there are lots of bears rather. Another bird-friendly thing to do, put out nest boxes. And you don't have to go to extremes like this South Hero homeowner. I think he's got 200 and something nest boxes. Even 1 or 2 boxes might bring birds to the yard. And you can buy nesting boxes or make your own. There's lots of information online about the size of the box, the size of the opening, how high to place the box, etc. And make sure you make boxes that you can easily open and clean later. House wrens love nesting boxes. An amorous male will fill 2, 3, maybe even more boxes with twigs, hoping to convince a female that he will make an excellent mate. Look at all the twigs coming out of this box. It was filled to overflowing, but the female chose this one instead. White-breasted nuthatches made good use of this box that Bernie made from scrap lumber. If you put out nesting boxes, it's important to clean them after each nesting season. Pull out the twigs, the old nests, the grasses, any insect nests that you find. There's sometimes mites in there, sometimes mice will have taken over. And wash the boxes with a weak bleach solution and let them dry in the sun. And again, I know I keep saying this, but if your yard has 1 or more free-ranging felines, it is just cruel to lure the birds in with feeders, water, or nest boxes. Here are a few more easy, in fact, free, inexpensive, in fact, free things you can do to attract birds to your property. Let dead or dying trees stand, unless, of course, they are a threat to your house or garage or barn or your neighbor's property. Dead trees provide nesting cavities and places for birds to take shelter during bad weather. And they're also full of yummy insects like grubs and ants. I'm not sure you can see them, but there are actually 2 pileated woodpeckers in this picture, one right there and one right there. Whoops. For some reason, it didn't want to stay. Making huge holes in one of our old maples and eating carpenter ants. And you can see a woodpecker hole right there in that tree. And in late summer and autumn, don't think of your dead flower garden as a mess. Instead, think of the dried plants as an all-you-can-eat buffet for cardinals and goldfinches, who will eat the seeds, and nuthatches, titmice, and chickadees, who will find insect and spider eggs. Now, some of these suggestions might be easier for landowners than for renters or homeowners who are part of condo associations. A lot of condo associations have very strict rules. But these lovers of birds and pollinators and healthy habitats can still make a big difference. They can advocate for a small pollinator garden, like this plot that Jericho Center residents and the town's Conservation Commission put in spring 2019. They can get on the board of their homeowners association and spread the word about smaller lawns, native plantings, being pollinator friendly, etc. They can talk with property managers or city arborists about the importance of native trees and other plants. And some condo associations won't allow bird feeders at all because they fear that they'll attract rodents, which they do actually. But some residents have succeeded in changing the policies to allow no waste feed mixes, which are sold as patio mix or only hulled sunflower. So there's very little mess from anything dropping on the ground. So there are lots of ways, whoops, this has a mind of its own today. Lots of ways we can all make our yards important parts of the natural habitat and help support native pollinators and thus support native food crops and help Vermont's beautiful birds and attract those birds to our yard so we can enjoy them all year long. Bernie and I decided over 7 years ago now to make our 1.3 acres a sanctuary for birds, for pollinators, for other wildlife, and for us. And we were proud to have our yard featured as a centerfold article in the spring 2023 issue of Birdwatching magazine. How homeowners in Vermont turned their 1.3 acre yard into habitat, and how you can too. We reduced lawn to mowed paths. We have added many native species, increasing the total from just a handful to almost 150 species. We now have over 24 kinds of shrubs and trees that produce fruit or nuts, as well as 30 perennials that are used by a wide variety of pollinators. And we've also greatly expanded the vegetable gardens, filling the pantry and 2 freezers, and insulating us against inflationary food prices, and giving us really healthy and very local food. And we still have time to sit on the yard and entertain friends. We've got room enough to do so. We're mowing less, we're raking less, raking almost not at all, actually. We have time to watch birds and soak up the beauty. And the yard list is now almost 130 bird species and 1.3 acres. We've seen 24 different mammals and 6 amphibians and reptiles. And astonishing to me, over the past 2 summers alone, Bernie has recorded over 550 species of insects. Actually, I think that's wrong. It's up to around 1,000 now in just 1.3 acres. And over 100 of those were kinds of bees, which I had no idea that would happen. He takes photos and posts them on iNaturalist, a citizen science tool to which people post photos of living things and then have the photos identified by experts, while at the same time they're adding to this vast data bank that can be used by scientists. Many other yards could also be sanctuaries, and many yards all over Vermont, all over the country, all over the world could be and should be a first line of defense against the catastrophic loss of pollinating insects and bird species. Now, this program stopped here, but I've got to show you some other couple other pictures because we had an unexpected visitor day before yesterday, and I would love to share it with you. This barred owl was only a few yards from the kitchen window for 2.5 hours. The bird, look how close he is. The bird knew we were watching. It sometimes opened or, closed one or both eyes and seemed to consider us for a minute or two. Clearly didn't think we were a threat. In fact, sometimes it looked disdainful or even smug. The owl started out on one of the poles that hold bird feeders, and it moved for a while to a little tree. And what amazed us was that little birds, goldfinches, chickadees, titmice, nuthatches, that sweet little Carolina wren on the tray feeder on the right, were definitely aware of the owl, and they didn't come right close to it, but they continue feeding only a yard or so away. That's an American goldfinch on the left, right above the owl. The big bird then moved back to the feeder pole, and this photo, I think, shows how well insulated the owl's eyes and beak are, with scores of tiny soft feathers to protect it against ice and snow and wind and when it's flying and snow when it dives down to get something. The owl scratched from time to time. We thought it burped from time to time. It opened and closed its bill as if it was remembering the tasty mice and voles that had munched on during the night. And it slept. We thought it was digesting. This long, long visit by a barred owl was one of so many delights that our yard and our feeders and our birds have given us over the years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mav. Wonderful, wonderful.
I love this guy or
Yes,
this lady. I'm not
I've
sure
I've
who it
had that
is.
same experience at my feeders, and it's definitely a thrill to have them so close like that.
Yes,
Um,
it is.
I found more when on the really snowy winters is when it happens, but you
And
probably have
this
quite a bit of snow in Jericho, so
we do, but it's light, fluffy stuff, and Owl should have no difficulty getting through it. I just think he wanted to be there. He saw other birds there and decided it was cool. We just put a blog post. I think you can see this. Can you see? Yeah, we have a blog called Vermont Birds and Words. Um, and if you go there, you can see. I think Bernie took about 200 photos of that bird,
wow.
and we're putting it together on a post with captions, trying to be silly a little bit. But
Yeah.
this bird entertained us for a very long time.
So are you open for some questions if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask?
Of course.
Check the chat here.
I looked a minute ago and there was nothing there, but
Yeah, I don't see anything there yet. So this is your opportunity. Before we wrap up, if you have any questions that you would like to ask Mav.
or comments about your own bird feeding experiences.
I got to tell you, Mav, I am a mealworm guru this year. I have kept my bluebirds around and I've attracted a Carolina wren.
Nice.
And I bought mealworms by the 10-pound bag recently
Wow.
because I've been going through so many mealworms. So
Wow.
um, give it a chance. The chickadees love them. The nuthatches love them. The titmice love them, as well as the bluebirds who just devour them daily. So
Bluebirds there's still bluebirds around us. Maybe we could get them at the feeder. I mean,
you
people think that's
definitely could. They once they discover those mealworms, they will. And it's interesting. I've talked to some other people that haven't had success with the mealworms, and I don't know. I have had wonderful success, so
Oh,
it's really been a treat to see what they attract.
are yours alive or frozen?
Mine are dried. So
Dried, right?
basically the same, they sell them for chickens.
Right.
So at Guy's Farm and Yard or wherever you can get a bag of dried mealworms. And the trick with them, you have to keep them dry. You don't want to put them out where they're going to get snow on them. So
Oh,
you can buy special mealworm feeders that kind of have covers over them to be able to keep them dry because it just kind of turns to mush if the mealworms get wet. Do you keep feeders out in the summer?
oh, for years when I lived here, I did, and it was such a treat because the birds would bring their young to the feeders. But bears have discovered Jericho Center in a big way, and we've had a bear in our yard. We've had bears walking down the sidewalk. We've had bears in the tree, only two houses down. So now we are very scrupulous about doing what Vermont Fish and Wildlife says to do to protect the bears. We don't put feeders out till December 1st this year. It used to be November 1st. And we take them down April 1st, except for the food for the orioles and hummingbirds. I'd love to feed it all year again, but we just can't. It's not fair to the bears.
I personally do, but I'm keeping very close track of any bears that are around.
Well, we know
Because
that they're around all the time. So,
they are around, but locally, Front Porch Forum is a great
Yeah.
venue to be able to know exactly where the bears are in town. So,
The last year that I fed all year, a female and her cub came, and they did about $300 worth of damage in about 10 minutes. They bent the metal poles all the way over. They flattened a metal hopper feeder. It was very impressive.
mm,
And they were happy.
easily done.
But I hate to have a bear have to be put down just for me. I can't I can't bear that. We had a very
Yeah.
funny bear incident. We have that was 2 years ago or 3 years ago. It was somewhat dry in the summer, and we were collecting water whenever it rained off the eaves to water our garden, so we wouldn't use our well water. And so there were many, many, many white 5-gallon buckets under the eaves. Well, this bear came up and looked at the 5-gallon buckets and looked at it and then started knocking them over. He was clearly used to 5-gallon compost buckets. And he was really ticked that there wasn't anything yummy in them. Ooh, ooh. And then he walked down the sidewalk looking for compost buckets elsewhere. It was a big bear. It may probably a she, but I, I
So I,
do I do have friends who feed all year long in Burlington because there just have never been seen bears there. So I'm assuming
yeah,
they feel safer. Yeah.
yeah. So I don't see any more questions. So we want to definitely thank you for putting this presentation together for us. Um, Great information and have fun feeding the birds.
Yes, and thank you for all the comments, the kind comments. Bye, everybody.
All right. Good night.
Good night.